Good morning. Today is March 11th, 2026. 5 or 6 years ago, I was retired and I decided, because of all the movies that came out, um, No Man of God, the extremely evil, wicked, vile, whatever, several things, conversation with a killer, so on. I said, well, this is ridiculous because in 1967, June, 59 years ago now, coming up 59 years, I had a little friend that I'd met, and I'm going to have to use pseudonyms because supposedly they want to sue, but in 1967, I met a friend when I was 6. In 67, I was 12 years, 9 months. My little friend, Susie, was 12 years, 7 months, born in November 54. I was born in September of 54. We had done several things and met her when she was 6 in front of her house on Aldington. And she was playing with jumping beans that she had come from Corpus Christi, Texas. And her father was working at NASA, and her mom and 2 sisters lived in the house. And my other little friend was 3, and I was 6, and we talked. And we talked about the daisies in her yard and stuff. You used to have this thing where you'd hold it up, and if your chin was yellow, it meant you liked butter or something. I remember that. Around 1965, my mom bought a diary to help me with writing and reading. I never used it. I never did anything. I was in about 5th or 6th grade. By the 7th grade, I started using it a little bit. Anyway, so Susie and I had done several things over the years. We tried baton twirling up at the Westside Athletic Skills Center. We had been in the Cedar Hills Baptist Choir, which was really good. Angels I have heard on high, da, 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 Gloria in excelsior, whatever. So we did these, and we had we had split session because of overcrowding in the schools. We have originally went to Cedar Hills Elementary, where I didn't know her that well. By 6th grade, we had gone to the Presbyterian Church over in Lake Shore and had to walk across the Cedar Hills Bridge with Steve Howard. So Susie and I were there. She was in Miss Thrillkill's class, and I was in Miss Cox's class, which was actually just a wooden house, and the door was open, so we could hear Miss Thrillkill's lesson, and they could hear Miss Cox's lesson. It was strange too, because at 9 o'clock they would come through with a cart, and for 5 cents you could get a regular milk, a little carton of milk, or a chocolate milk, or a bunch of grapes. And that was like before lunch. So anyway, by 7th grade, I think it was 7th grade, 1967, we were on our way to 8th grade. She had suggested that we take summer band. I was happy to be out of school. And my parents were getting ready to go to Daytona. So it was like the first week of June. And we walked up there, and my mom had gotten a clarinet, a Bundy clarinet. And we walked up to the school. And because it was like the first session, there's a band shell behind the school. The school is shaped like a wagon wheel. There was a new gym, and John Prom, I think, was principal, and Mr. Stasser or somebody was the principal. Anyway, John Prom was there for a while, and I think the next guy was Stasser or something. Anyway, Strausser or something like that. Dina Boys and whatever, and they switched up. And there was a band shell, and it was sort of like a coat room because there was like concrete steps or concrete bleachers and a few concrete places you could sit, and some equipment stuff. And there was always a vending machine. I know there were vending machines out on the sidewalk, and there was a new gym. Well, we were in the band shell, let's call it something like that, and we I remember Miss Roselle, the teacher, Janice Roselle. showing me how to put together my instrument. But we were no longer little kids. We didn't have to raise our hand to go to the restroom. If there was a break or you needed to use the restroom, you could just go out. So I think that's where she met Bundy. I don't know. I think she was dressed all for summer. She had a white peasant top on with the little eye hooks, fluffy, and then she had on Wrangler jeans, shorts that she had frayed about this much. I had on some beachcombers, which I had cut down and kind of tried to fray. They were like elastic, though. It was funny. And then I probably didn't have on good outfit because we were going to Daytona. And I had school clothes and summer clothes. Well, my summer clothes were probably packed up for the 7 or 8 day trip to Daytona. So I was just probably wearing my brother's Gant shirt and those pull on jeans. So we went up to the school, and Jeb Stewart, 1967, we walked from Cedar Hills, Aldington, and Altland. Then me and Susie go up there. And after the class, we're walking home, and suddenly Susie stops on the bleachers in front of the school and is doing something dramatic with her hands, and she's facing back to the school. And I'm thinking, I want to go home. We're getting ready to go on vacation, which I probably should have invited her to come down to Daytona too. Her dad was at NASA. He was a commanding officer there. But anyway, I said, I'm going to extrapolate. I think she may have been wearing fancy leather sandals and they were cutting in her toe. And so she didn't want to walk home and have it cut even more into her toe, which was about a mile and a quarter. So I said, oh, I'll try to pretend to hitchhike. It was a summer love. I had read the little tween magazines and whatever they called them back then, Out something, I don't remember, but I was reading them. I watched the news. I was a pretty smart little girl. But so I said, there's a song, are you going to San Francisco? Be sure to wear a flower in your hair. So I walk over across the street and I pretended to hitchhike. In the meantime, Susie is still sitting on the bleachers. And all of a sudden, this large tank-like car goes by with the fishtails and it's olive green. Well, a neighbor woman, Mrs. Mock, had an Oldsmobile that was similar to that. And I said, you know what? I'm going to get in trouble. So I started to walk back from a little bend in the baseball road back over to where the bleachers were across the street, maybe 100 feet, 150 feet. And all of a sudden, this bright red Volkswagen popped over the curb and went right to where Debbie was, or Susie, and stopped. And I said, hey, naked, because he wasn't wearing a shirt. I said, hey, naked, I don't know. Okay, this is a 12-year-old girl coming up on to preteen. So anyway, 13.9 months. I walked over there, and Susie had got off the bleachers and was talking through the window on the driver's side, and I stood to the passenger side. The Volkswagen was a very bright red. I'd call it like a ruby red, like on the nurses used to have like an American Red Cross thing on their lapel at NAS, and they were wearing the little sharp-looking candy striper nurse outfits, and that color red that was in that cross, almost like a blood drop, bright red, very shiny, had a tag on the back of it that appeared to be white with a black border and black digits and numbers, about 6 digits across. Didn't know what state it was. It wasn't a Florida tag at the time. Since I've looked it up, we had what I call a garbage can, the Dempster color green tags with fluorescent lettering, yellowish white. So that was Florida. It wasn't a Florida tag. It was an out-of-state tag. So I walk across. I go over there. Susie's talking to him. And I'm carrying my clarinet. Whatever. They're talking low. I couldn't understand what they were saying. He was an older kid. He wasn't like 16 or 18. I always said he was 20 to 22. I always said that 20 to 22. And she's talking and she says, get in. And I said, no, Susie, it was just pretend. We're just pretending. And we didn't know this guy. So I said, no. And then there was a latch on this Naugahyde seat. Down at the bottom, there was a latch. You pulled forward, it looked like a guitar pick. It was white. She pushed it forward. It had the passenger door open. The seat folded down. So I thought about it for a minute. And she's going to get in this car with a stranger. It wasn't Greg Powers. It wasn't Craig Fabian. It wasn't one of the Diane brothers. We didn't know this guy from Heather. He was older than even the older boys. And the older boys in the neighborhood would be 16 to 18. This guy was 22. I thought he was 20 or 22. So anyway, I decided to get in. So I got in the back, and then Susie got in the front. Okay. He backed up and somehow got turned around, and we got out of the baseball field. But remember, the school closed at 1 from my extrapolated knowledge. So everybody's leaving the school. It shuts down at 12 or 1. So morning classes were over. Summer school closing down. People were going that little baseball road. It was one way in and one way out. So we got on the baseball road and we're going to La Moya. And I said, there's books back here. And he said, just move the books. Just move the books. So I moved the books and I made a little place to sit. There were no seat belts as far as I know. It's too early in time for seat belts. So what we were doing is we would cross the baseball field to save some steps. Rather than walking around to La Moya on the street or sidewalk, we would cross through the baseball. We even got yelled at a few times. At the end of the baseball field, the fence had a rip in it, and you could just scooch down, and that would save a lot of steps, you know. So anyway, that's why we were at the baseball grounds to begin with, to cut through. Across the street was a cow pasture. It was a Towers Hardware cow pasture. And we came to La Moya, and then he turned left onto La Moya. It's about 200 yards to get to West Gannett, which then was facing the cow pasture, you know. Then the books, I had looked at one of the books, and it looked like a Bible. I thought, oh, this guy must be religious. He was wearing khaki colored shorts, no shirt. The steering wheel was white and large and went all the way down to his knees. He looked like Greg Powers. He looked like Steve Parker. I can't remember the name, or Billy Powers. He was a slender dude, older than us. He had knobbly knees, well-developed legs, knobbly knees. He turned the steering wheel and went towards West Gannett. Now, when he got to West Gannett, he pulled a revolver, a silver revolver for somewhere, and pointed it to the ceiling of the Volkswagen. So I look over at Debbie. She's quit talking. He's pulled the gun right beside her head and pointing to the ceiling with it. Now, I said, and the cars are backing up behind us, so that was a good thing. Thank you, Jesus. Because he couldn't do whatever he was thinking of doing. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes were jet black, like a shark's eye, like a dead eye. They were back. But that wasn't all. He was angry as hell, and his eyebrow seemed to go straight across his forehead. It is amazing to me that Ann Rule wrote the book and has a guy in a rear view mirror, because that's exactly what we saw. That's what I saw. The seats had about 6 inches between them, and they were not tall seats. They did not have headrests on them. I could see him. He had a mole somewhere on him, a rather large what Kit would say was a birthmark. She used to put birthmarks on them. We're going to the family later, the dynamics of the gay divorcee mom. Her husband was at Nassau. Anyway, there was Kit, Kitty, Carol, and Susie, 4 women in the house. The husband was in Daytona, Nassau, just down the road, 90 miles. Anyway. So we come to the corner. He pulls the revolver, and we turn right onto West Gannett. And I said, what's your name? And he said, Theodore. And I thought, Theodore, because when we were going up, if somebody's name was Gregory, it was Greg. Walter's Walt. Um, Geraldine is Jerry, right? Elizabeth is Liz or whatever. So anyway, he pulled the revolver. I said, "What is your name?" He said, "Theodore." And I had at some moment had my I was miserable. I was opening and looking at stuff. I looked at that book. There also was a yellow pastel polo. My dad did not golf. My brother did not golf. He rode a motorcycle. My dad worked at NAS. He wore his Navy T-shirts from World War II in the Navy until they literally rotted. The material rotted. We had bed sheets from the Navy where your toe would rip the bed sheet because they were thin and got old. Anyway, my dad did not golf. He wore T-shirts and a denim jacket he had from the Navy. But anyway. So I knew this was a polo, so I had moved that polo. It was a pale yellow. And after years and years, I said there was an emblem on it over one of the breast pockets, but it was round. Do you know that Ralph Lauren had a round emblem, looked like a Greek thing that you get in the Olympics, and it had like those little cluster of leaves? That's what it looked like. It wasn't the polo where the guys riding along that. And I said, oh, somebody's shirt. I didn't want to step on it, so I had folded it up. I looked at the books. One was a coffee table book that seemed blues and golds for me, and maybe some guy throwing a net or something on the front of it. The other one was Concordex. On one side were what looked like hieroglyphics, and then English, kind of like a Bible, where you have one line of chapters and then another line of chapters, except in this, one of the chapters was English and then hieroglyphics on the other. I had seen weird books because my dad had training manuals from World War II, Deutsche, and learned German and stuff. He had other training manuals from World War II. So I said, okay, it's something. I don't know what it is. Put it down. And this guy was getting madder and madder. And I looked at Debbie, had the revolver on us. I said, well, he's not a GQ guy at all. He was a hood. So I said, what's your name? And he said, Theodore. And I said, Theodore? I said, well, what's your last name? And he said, Bundy. And I said, my name, whatever. And then my name is Mary. This is Susie. And then I said, if you're looking for girls, maybe you should go up to the high school. And then I said, Susie's father's an admiral at NASA. I think that's what broke the ice, is because Susie's mom, Kit, would always say, my husband's a CO, where yours are just E's. My husband's a CO this and a CO that. And I thought, okay, he must be really high in the Navy. And in my 12-year-old mind, he's an admiral. He's at NASA, he's an admiral. Cape Canaveral, that's what John Kennedy's stuff. Okay? So I'm going to leave it there at that. But anyway, I won't leave it there at that because it's kind of bad. But anyway, we went down West Gannett and we just talked. I said things like, you're nice. You ought to meet Vicky and Jean. You ought to meet Carol and Kit. You ought to meet Carol and Kit. They're already out on their own. They're so beautiful. I remember saying, Carol and Kit are so pretty. They're so beautiful and they're already out on their own. If you're looking for girls, maybe you should go up to the high school. And I just talked, and I may have talked about my mom from Philadelphia. I don't know. But we talked. And then Susie started talking again. See, this is going to be hard because I try to not use the real names, but I really don't give a rat's ass. This is my truth, and I will tell it. We went down West Gannett. We came to Blanding, and we crossed over Blanding and went to the old Texaco station that was there. It was red brick. And he didn't park normal then either. He hopped the curb at the baseball field. Then he sort of hopped the curb at the gas station and parked on the sidewalk, which I thought was odd because my dad was very, he had his Hudsons and his Bel Airs and stuff, and he was very meticulous about it. This guy was parked partially on the sidewalk. That would know, you don't do anything unorthodox in a car with my dad, But he was parked on the sidewalk facing down Harlow. Susie got out, and I'm thinking, please open that latch. I want to get out too. This guy's a hood. Something's wrong with him. And I kept thinking about Gene over in the 7-Eleven, which was behind the Texaco. Gene was a man and about in his 30s, and we knew him our whole life. He was at the gas station there. The 7-Eleven on Harlow, and then later he was a gas station over on San Juan in his 80s, still working in his 80s. Gene, I don't know his last name. I just remember him. And I kept thinking, we could get over there, we can tell somebody what's happened. And finally, I think Debbie exchanged her phone number with this guy. Okay, that leads to a whole can of worms. But let me say something real quick. If Bundy was involved with Diane that summer and had met her in March and was dating her in a normal fashion, he was a very intelligent person. But I think he had some type of obsession. I think he may have killed the little girl, Ann Burr. And now that he's 20 years, 7 months, he comes flying across the country because even though he knows he could go into a normal, if he acted normal, he could have formed a normal relationship with Diane Edwards and had a normal life. But he couldn't. He could not do that. He had to go somewhere far from where he lived to see what this obsession was. And I think he had been up and down the coast of Florida, maybe Daytona, who knows. Maybe he went down to Fort Lauderdale. It was a big thing that summer. The summer of 67, you could go down there. You said, well, he was going to Stanford. I called Stanford. I tried to talk, just like I called the president of Wells Fargo and asked him why they were doing the crap they were doing. They said, you shouldn't have called. It took care of the problem, didn't it? I looked up who the president of Wells Fargo was, and at the time he was in San Francisco. That's a whole different story. He messed up a TOD and stuff, and they created a new account. Why would you do that and make my nephew the tax matters person? That's a whole different thing. I cussed him out. I wrote Mr. Trump. I wrote Trump, who was president at the time. I said, why? I was trying to put transfer and death on several of my stock issues, and so this guy, the Wells Fargo people, created another account and all this. And anyway, I took care of this. Why did you call the president? I damn ass called him. He was down on that staircase thing and down in San Francisco too. I think on that same street that has a winding staircase. But anyway, that's a whole different story. They had a different president and stuff now anyway. Oh, why would he travel? Because he was relatively intelligent, probably IQ about mine, like 121, 133, 143, somewhere in that range, okay? Follow my drift here, okay? So anyway, he was trying to figure out what was wrong with him. And that was probably the reason for the trip. I'm tired, Miss McChesney. I'm tired, Mr. Deckel. I'm telling the story. I was a passenger in that vehicle. I seen the face. You never forget the face if you've seen that face. It was like, here's this GQ guy, nice looking, not like the guys whose hair was starting to get long and had button-up T-shirts with ribs on them. He had khaki shorts on, and even though he didn't have a shirt on, you could tell he was kind of a GQ. And what I think happened, now let me extrapolate. During band practice, we were older. You didn't have to raise your hands to go down the hall. I think Debbie had gone out to the sidewalk and bathroom area where the vending machines were, because that's all there was. There wasn't a cafeteria or something. It was just summer school. But I think you could get a soda or maybe some Lance crackers or something from a vending machine. Possibly. I'm not sure. And there was a girls' bathrooms out there. I think she had gone into the hallway, and I think he had given her a ruse of some type, like, I'm going to be assistant coach here next year, or I'm officiating a basketball game, because the kids did play basketball in the summer, and there was a car body shop there too. So I don't know what he said to her, or maybe he said, I've got to get my brother enrolled here. And I think she may have said, my sandal's cutting my feet. If I see you afterwards, could you give us a lift home or something crazy like that? And he may have said, yeah, I'll give you a lift. I don't know. Some exchange happened that I wasn't aware of. So it wasn't me hitchhiking. The meetup was already, that's why she stopped at the bleachers. She had already made it. She was waiting to see if he showed up. And I go across the street to hitchhike because I think she needs a ride. For some reason, she needed a ride. And the only thing I can extrapolate from that is maybe her sandals were cutting a hole, cutting a blister in her toe or something. She didn't want to walk. And I wanted to go home because my family was going to Daytona for a week. Okay. So that's how we ran across him. What was he doing here? He knew that he could have a Leave It to Beaver. He could have June Cleaver. He could have a normal life. He had already met a girl that would have perpetuated a normal life. He was 20, going on 21. He just needed to calm down, do a few things. He could have had the life. He could have had a life similar to his mom and dad's life. But he knew he couldn't. He had to find out about whatever the hell obsession he had. So he scoots all across the nation like Koberger to find out. It's also, people talked about spring break. Now, there are other things that happened because Susie did give her phone number to him. And that's a house with one trim line phone near the kitchen, and possibly because they were state of the art, they actually had a second trim line near the bedrooms. Because her mom, Kit and Kitty, her mom was a maitre d' in the heart of Jacksonville. And that's what she did for a living. She played the organ. She could doll herself up and look exactly like Elizabeth Taylor. Like I said, Kit and Kitty were very, very beautiful. Carol, the middle sister, was more like me or Susie. We knew there was something wrong with that. But if Kit had picked up that phone and he continued some kind of ruse saying, I scared the hell out of them kids. I did not want them hitchhiking. And I wanted to prove a point to them. Anyway, that's another part of the story, which I will get into later. Yes, I rode in a car with Bundy when I was 12. That's it. That's the God truth. As God is my witness, I'm telling the truth. Thank you.